like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name is Dustin White. I am from Boone County, West Virginia, where I grew up. 11 generations on my mother's side, 8 generations on my father's side. Um, Boone County prides itself on being the gateway of the coal fields in West Virginia. My father was a coal miner, and I've had coal miners on both sides of my family for generations.
Familiar story. Um, how about tell us about your organization?
So, OVEC, or the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, which is our formal name, has been in existence for 30 years now. Been fighting a lot of environmental issues inside of West Virginia and along the Ohio River. Everything from a pulp mill that was proposed near Huntington, West Virginia, to taking on Ashland Oil. And then they went a step further and decided to take on the coal industry with their monstrosity known as mountaintop removal. And now we're furthering our work into other issues, including oil and gas.
So how much of OVEC's work would you say is related to water quality and water quality advocacy?
Pretty much the majority of OVEC's work is related around water quality and human health. We have a lot of scientific data that shows that a lot of adverse environmental impacts are actually harming the people of West Virginia, especially with coal mining and mountaintop removal. We have the scientific data that shows that it's causing a lot of water pollution that's really harming the health of people who live near these sites.
So maybe tell us a story about an interaction that stood out for you that's related to water quality.
To me, all the stories kind of stand out. When I first started working with OVEC, I worked in a community down in Wyoming County, West Virginia, which had their water contaminated by a mountaintop removal site there. At the time, it was a company owned by Russians, Bluestone, which is now owned once again by our current governor, Jim Justice. And the folks there were very concerned about their water quality. We've done some extensive testing with experts to their water. I'm saying a lot. They've done a lot of testing with experts and really determined that there was something going on with their water quality there. And the thing that they had all in relation to was their proximity to this mine. And they eventually went to court, got a partial victory, but unfortunately, when it came down to crunch time, the judge ruled against them, and there was no remediation for their water quality issues.
What kind of issues, what kind of health issues were they having?
We see in these communities people who have a lot of different types of cancer, Crohn's disease, gallbladder issues, other gastrointestinal distresses, and the cancers themselves are ranging in a wide variety, and some of them are pretty rare.
What can you tell us about the chemical spill and advocating for municipal water as opposed to privatized water?
So the chemical spill that happened in 2014, the MCHM spill, the methyl cyclohexane methanol spill, what eventually led to the West Virginia water crisis, really kind of, for a brief moment, kind of shone the spotlight on the water quality issues inside West Virginia. One of the biggest questions that I had hoped that the national media was going to ask was why was 300,000 people on one public water system? And the reason why that is the majority of rivers and streams that could be used as public intakes have already been contaminated by other industries. And when that chemical spill happened, no one had any idea that chemical was upstream of the water intake. This was a chemical used by the coal industry to process coal. So it's also setting in what's known as these slurry impoundments, which are these giant toxic lakes inside these communities of just after the coal is washed when it's mined, it's just pumped into these impoundments. So that chemical is still setting in communities today. But when that leaked into the Elk River, that was really kind of a shock for us, and especially for me personally. In October of 2013, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And the day of the chemical spill, we were in Beckley, West Virginia, which was outside the area impacted by the spill, finding out that there was pretty much nothing they could do for my father. He had already underwent major surgery, hoping that they could remove the cancer, and it was unsuccessful. And we got home that day, and my father was in a lot of pain. He was already bedfast. And one of my friends of the family kind of rushed into the house. We had just got back and said, "Don't use the water. There's been some type of spill." And I turned on the TV, and that's when I learned about what had happened. And my father was, of course, on the same public water system all the way down in Boone County where he lived, and we could not use his water. And we spent the next several weeks having to melt snow and boil creek water to try to take care of my dying father. And in the meantime, while this was also going on, I was also helping to coordinate water deliveries for a lot of the communities that were basically being left off the map during the relief effort. It really took a lot of the grassroots people who were familiar with kind of the holler communities and the more rural communities to take it upon ourselves to network with allies outside the state to get water into these communities, and we were doing the deliveries ourselves. And in the meantime, the governor releases the statement that, you know, it's our decision of whether or not we want to use the water. To this day, they have still not told us this water is safe to use. The term they use is appropriate. So we still do not have any real verification that our water is safe to use. And in the days following, after they had told us that we could start using the water again, my father's water still smelled like MCHM and had turned a brown color. And when I attempted to take this to the state capitol to show my politicians that, no, this water is not safe, especially not for my dying father, they attempted to arrest me. So that's, you know, kind of really a moment for me, because that's really all of my work and everything kind of came to a head. Here was my father dying of bladder cancer, which is a cancer that is connected to environmental issues. He worked as a miner near a slurry impoundment, so he was exposed to all these chemicals the entire time he worked. And for years we had been complaining about the water quality inside the state. We had, you know, tried to warn people that no water system is safe. You know, as long as these industries are allowed to just basically keep doing what they're doing. The DEP, of course, had not inspected this site where the MCHM had been stored, and we have often tried to highlight the failure of the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection not doing their job, and for so long we just kind of been brushed off to the side, and that moment kind of really brought it all to a head for me. But it was definitely a stressful time. And I know it was for a lot of people. And experiencing everything in and around my father, it really kind of concreted the fact that no one should be brought into this world or taken out of it without the promise of clean water.
What similarities do you see between situations in West Virginia and situations in Flint, Michigan, for example?
So I see a lot of similarities between Flint and West Virginia. I've actually had a lot of contact with folks who live out in that area, and we've spoken before. And a lot of it comes down to the failure of government. There's faults on both sides. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's just when a group of people are marginalized and live in high poverty, these basically corporate cronies, for lack of a better word, feel like they can do whatever they want to us. And I definitely see that happening in Flint as it is in West Virginia. I think one of the biggest differences is it's such a wider scale, especially in West Virginia and the Appalachian region. where Flint is a little bit more confined. Some minor differences, but very much the same. I mean, it really comes down to the people being seen as disposable, therefore they're not cared about enough to help.
Can you tell us about some of the new, more current issues that are happening with water quality in West Virginia?
So with the active mining and things, and mountaintop removal is still happening, even though the coal industry is having market woes. I need to be clear that these processes are still happening and people are still being poisoned by them, and that's creating a lot of water pollution. Even reclaimed sites, the so-called reclamation, these sites are still producing pollution, things like selenium, high conductivity, things like that. So there's even that legacy that even when the mining's done, it's still causing pollution. And now we're seeing the growing threat of the oil and gas industry inside West Virginia. And we're looking at somewhere upwards of around 16 proposed pipelines in and around West Virginia. Some of the current ones that we're facing right now are the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, the Mountaineer Express Pipeline, the Leach Express Pipeline, the SM80 Pipeline, and some of these are 48-inch pipelines, so they're quite large. The Leach Express is going to be cutting under the Ohio River, so they're planning to run this pipeline directly under the Ohio River, which is currently already considered one of the most polluted rivers in the nation, but is also the drinking water intake for Huntington, West Virginia, Cincinnati, Ohio, Lexington, Kentucky. Is it Lexington or Louisville?
I believe it might be. I don't know.
Might want to fact check on that one. yeah. But anyway,
It's whatever's running by Ohio.
it should be either Lexington or Louisville, Kentucky gets their public water from the Ohio River, because they had to shut down their intakes after the MCHM spill. So.
And so are Wheeling and Sistersville and all those cities that are along the coast of the Ohio River also?
I'm not 100% sure where everybody gets their water intake. I'm not as familiar with the northern part of the state as I should be, but I'm learning slowly.
There's plenty of coverage that the state needs.
Yeah. So these pipelines are definitely threatening the drinking water of folks inside West Virginia and in other states. The Mountaineer Express Pipeline will be running under a portion of the Kanawha River, and that's not counting the smaller streams and things that they'll be cutting through. And also with the advent of fracking, we do have hydraulic fracturing in the northern part of the states, which is very water intensive. They're pulling water out of our streams and rivers for the fracking process, and then in the process of fracking, you have this wastewater that's also toxic. And one thing a lot of folks don't really quite understand, it's not just the streams and rivers that are being polluted, it's the groundwater as well. And there are folks in a lot of these rural areas that are still relying on their groundwater for their water sources. Their personal wells and things like that is what they rely on, and that's also what's being contaminated. So we have the fracking, the oil, and the pipelines, and now there's this proposed Appalachian ethane storage hub that our senators Manchin and Capito are championing for, which will essentially make the Ohio Valley the equivalent of Cancer Alley down in the Gulf. We're looking at a lot of petrochemical industries that will be coming in that would be in conjunction with the oil and gas industries and the processes that they do. So we're really kind of in dire straits. West Virginia is just really being hammered. They're still blowing up mountains in the southern part of the state. The Kanawha Valley is already considered the chemical valley. Now they're fracking in the northern part of the state, and they want to turn the Ohio Valley into Cancer Alley number 2. So that's really kind of in perspective. It's kind of like, pardon my language, but bend over West Virginia. You're going to get it from both ends. and it's all along as long as the people here are continually marginalized by the rest of the world, they're going to continue to do this to us, and for me growing up, I've seen a lot of the water quality issues. I've seen fish kills. I can remember being a little kid seeing my first slurry spill. It turns an entire river black. Weeks before the MCHM spill, we actually had another chemical spill that turned a river white for miles. That was a chemical known as DT50D, that was a latex dust suppressant used by the coal companies. So this continues to be an ongoing problem here. We had what they call a Bakken bomb train. A train hauling Bakken oil from North Dakota exploded and went into the Kanawha River in Fayette County a couple of years ago. So yeah, the threats are just ongoing, and anytime something happens, our politicians are, like, now's not the time to talk about it. And then the next accident happens, now's not the time to talk about it. And, for me, really getting into this fight, one of the things that really changed my opinion was, one, seeing mountaintop removal from the air, seeing the devastation that it really caused, because I very much grew up being a coal supporter, and seeing it from the air and realizing that pretty much everything you had been told was a lie, it kind of does something to you. I mean, especially when you believed so wholeheartedly into this industry, which so-called fed your family. And then going home and starting to do the research and learning that I was outliving people I played with as a kid. There was a boy in Printer, West Virginia, which was impacted by this process known as coal slurry injection. I played with as a kid. He got sick at 19 and died at 21. And when you find out that people you played with as a kid are undergoing these surgeries, developing brain tumors, and actually, you're outliving you, that kind of sets your path, and you can't unknow that. So that's really why I'm in this fight, why it's really part of my passion, and if anyone were to spend any amount of time in the West Virginia coal fields, and even now the fracking sites, you'll see that they're killing us. It's a slow death. People are very much uneducated about the issues. I don't want to say uneducated, more like miseducated. They're often told that just because you can't see it, taste it, smell it, it's not harmful. A lot of these pollution elements that are in people's water, have no odor, no taste, no nothing. So the people are taking this stuff in and not even realizing it. And it can take decades. It's a cumulative impact. You drink the water once, it's probably not going to hurt you. But you spend years drinking this water, you're going to start feeling health impacts. And it's often just swept under the rug. The West Virginia Coal Association likes to try to debunk the health studies by saying that, they just show correlation, not causation. But a lot of stuff in medicine is correlation. I could eat a pound of sugar a day. I may or may not get diabetes, but there's a pretty strong correlation that I will. So that's really, the way they play us, the propaganda machine that they have, and the miseducation is what has allowed them to do this for so long.
Why do you think clean water is a right?
Clean water is a human right across the board, including clean water and clean air. It's an essential part of life, and above all else, people have the right to live. All things have the right to live. And in this work, I have really come so close to perpetual death and destruction that I've really learned to value life more, and to realize that every life has a right to exist. And without clean air and clean water, it's yeah, it's not the same. It's just in, to know that people around you all the time are being slowly poisoned, and to know that parts of your legacy and your family history are poisoning people too is just something that you have to live with. Again, like I said, you can't unknow this stuff once you know it. The streams and rivers that I used to play in as a kid, I won't even go into now. I will no longer eat the fish. I used to love to go fishing, and it's really changed my life. And to know what it's doing to other people is very disheartening.
What's your attitude toward tap water since the chemical spill?
Well, not to sound cynical, I do use my tap water, but I kind of see it as I've already been exposed to so much stuff over my lifetime. What's a little more? But really, we need a safe water system. People need to have the security to know that at least the water that they're drinking is safe for them, and it's not full of chemicals and other hazardous materials. We shouldn't have to buy our water, and that's a big issue with areas like West Virginia. People are too poor to buy their water.
As in bottles.
As in bottled water, yeah. But there's a lot of people who really can't afford to be on a public water system either right now, and that's the reason why they still rely on their groundwater. And that's part of it too, is these corporate entities like West Virginia American Water have capitalized on the much needed life-giving source for people in the area, and they kind of control the ballgame. And the public really need to rise up and realize that these corporations and companies do not have your best interests at heart. Even the coal industries, the oil and gas industries, anything that makes profit off of your health and well-being should be illegal.
Sorry.
Sorry.
What would you suggest to someone in the community on how to get more involved in water protection?
One way to get more involved is definitely look at your grassroots organizations, the people on the front lines. They're the ones who definitely need the most support. It's really the folks on the front lines who really know the impact and know the community members and can offer the help that folks need. And just awareness, just knowing and realizing that a lot of the activities we do in everyday life, including turning on our lights, has the chance of potentially poisoning somebody. That's the reason why we need to push towards renewable energies, so that we're not relying on these fossil fuels that during the entire life cycle from cradle to grave is toxic to somebody. A lot of folks think that burning natural gas in power plants is better than coal, but unless you factor in the entire life cycle, including the extraction process, you cannot consider it clean energy. And when it comes down to things like wind and solar, they have to be community owned. They have to be, given better subsidies so that there's more progression in the scientific research behind these, because these fossil fuel companies know that if they can't control it, they lose the money. And that's really what it all comes down to. It's corporate greed. We're being sacrificed for money. And unfortunately, for an area like Appalachia, they have done so well with the propaganda machine that it could probably be considered one of the largest studies of Stockholm Syndrome in the nation. We've actually started to identify with our captors. The same industries that have, for 150 years, shot at us, poisoned our waters, given us poor health issues, as now our champion. And we really need to change that mindset, and West Virginians deserve better. Yep. Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, or I feel like you hit the nail on the head
Okay.
with the last bit.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't know of anything else. It's just, yeah, well, I mean, especially One of the things that folks need to realize is there are a lot of regulations on the books, even though under this administration, they're really taking steps to get rid of a lot of these regulations. But yeah, there are regulations on the books that are supposed to help manage these issues. But in areas like West Virginia and Kentucky, it's all about enforcement. And now in West Virginia, we have a coal baron as our governor. One of the top purveyors of mountaintop removal in the area is now our governor, who appointed an ex-coal executive as head of the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. So the cards are stacked against us. And that's what people really need to realize. It's really corporate and political corruption that's causing this to happen. Yeah, and even, I mentioned some with the Trump administration. One of the first things he done was get rid of the stream protection rule, which was not an Obama rule. This rule came out of over 5 years of people from Appalachia going to DC, telling the EPA and telling the Department of Interior that we want a rule to help rein in some of this mining pollution. And as soon as Trump took over, that was one of the first things he got rid of. We finally worked for years to get the National Academy of Sciences to look into the health issues and some of the research done by Dr. Michael Hendricks. And we were moving forward with that, and Trump cuts the funding to that. So everything has really been set up to let us kind of fail. And until we get the rest of the nation to realize that we're not just stupid hillbillies and we're not just stupid rednecks, that we are people who have the right to live, and just because we live simply does not mean we're simple people. We need the rest of the nation to start caring about us, and we need them to stop marginalizing us in the public and really know where the terms redneck and hillbilly come from, and know that they're inclusive, that they're anti-colonialist, that the real rednecks and the real hillbillies will stand up to anyone, stand up for anyone, no matter how oppressed they are. But right now, we're kind of in dire straits. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.